Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for March 20th of 2024. Currently we have a dual marginal threat setup, one for southern Texas here across the Texas coast, as well as a marginal threat that extends across western Oklahoma into parts of the Texas Panhandle there. Threats for today do include a small 2% tornado risk for northwestern Oklahoma, excluding the Panhandle. For our damaging wind threats for today, we do have a 5% damaging wind risk for both marginal threat locations, and we do have a 5% hail risk for both marginal threat locations as well. For tomorrow, we do have a slight risk for southwestern Texas there, including the towns of Houston and San Antonio. Threats for tomorrow do include a 2% tornado risk along the coastline. For our damaging wind risk, we do have a 5% damaging wind risk, and for our hail risk, we do have a 15% risk for large hail. So we could be watching for the potential of severe thunderstorms tomorrow, as well as our day 3 outlook, where we do have a fairly large marginal threat extending mainly across the coast for Louisiana, Florida, and mainly across southern Florida, but it should stay mainly across the coast outside of southern Florida. Our day 4 to day 8 outlooks, we do have a day 5 15% for western Oklahoma into southern Kansas and northwestern Texas there in the Panhandle, where we are definitely watching for the potential of severe thunderstorms, and severe thunderstorms that may potentially be significant upcoming. So we will definitely keep an eye on this in some upcoming dates. Taking a look at our WPC outlook, starting off with our excessive rainfall forecast. For today, we do not really have any regions that we are watching for the potential of flash flooding. For our day 2 outlook, we do have a marginal threat across eastern Texas into southern Oklahoma, where we could see some isolated flash flooding. For our day 3 outlook for the 23rd, we do have 2 marginal threats, one across the southern eastern seaboard from North Carolina into southern Alabama in the Florida Panhandle, as well as southern Florida there. For our day 4 outlook, we do have a slight risk for southern New Jersey into eastern Maryland and Delaware there, as well as a marginal threat for coastal regions of northern California, and southwestern Oregon there. And then for our winter weather outlooks, for today, we do have the risk of heavy snowfall for not only the New England corridor, including Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, but we are also watching for a winter storm that is currently making its way across the northern half of the United States, where we could see quite a bit of heavy snowfall for northern states such as North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, potentially into Wisconsin, and then Michigan. This is going to eventually move into the New England corridor around the 24th, and that is also going to drop an insane amount of heavy snowfall. And then for day 4 to day 7 outlooks, we are watching for another winter storm that's going to impact the northern half of the United States again. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars like we usually do, as well as taking a look at our surface analysis and how that's going to work in conjunction with their risk for severe thunderstorms in our upper air maps. As of right now, we do have a upper level low, which is across the southwestern United States. This may potentially be helping the risk for severe thunderstorms. However, it is kind of weak, and it may be advecting into the region. However, it is kind of far out, and it is positively tilted. So overall advection into the region may be limited to mostly non-existent. I think the majority of our work is expected to be done by our subtropical jet out of the Pacific Ocean here, and that is likely working in conjunction with this low pressure system to support the risk for severe thunderstorms across the southern central plains for today. As of our surface analysis, we do have a surface low across the northern Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma Panhandle, as well as a cold front which is pushing out of the north here, and that will trigger the risk for severe thunderstorms across Oklahoma into the Texas Panhandle. I will have to do a double check on this marginal threat because there isn't a whole lot of activity. However, I think our storms may mainly fire off of warm air advection, and I may cut that part out if that isn't true. And this here, this does represent a dry line on radar omega. However, this is not a dry line. This is a trough. This is not a dry line. I know that it is kind of confusing, especially with the fact that radar omega is reluctant to change it to a dry line icon like it should be, and they're leaving it as a trough icon, which I am kind of annoyed about because it is kind of confusing, especially if it's in a Western Texas setup like this. So overall, I do have a bone to pick with that, but this is not a dry line. Taking a look at our 700 millibars and our low level jet, so we can kind of get an idea of what our low level jet may look like and how that's going to affect our tornado risk as well as our speed shear. Mainly focusing on the tornado risk area, we are kind of having kind of the lack of a low level jet overall for the entire region. We do have some 700 millibar flow, however, for the main 2% tornado risk area, I mean, we do have a little bit of a low level jet. It's not really all that much. Upwards of 25 miles per hour is basically nothing. But we do have a low level jet that is extending down into 850 millibars, which is indicated by these contours here that aren't shaded in. So that deeper low level jet may be able to support a low end tornado risk. But overall, we shouldn't really see too much of a tornado risk across this region. It is going to be mainly a damaging wind and hail risk, but a marginal tornado cannot be ruled out. As for our speed shear, we do have almost non-existent flow at our 700 millibars. So if we get pretty strong flow at our 200 millibars, we should definitely see quite a bit of speed shear in the support for some hail. Taking a look at our 300 millibars and how that's going to affect our speed shear, as well as our defluence. Let's take a look at our two main areas for severe thunderstorms. Starting off with Oklahoma, we're kind of in a weird situation here because we have a very strong upper level jet streak here. However, across Oklahoma, it does look like winds may actually be converging a little bit. So I'm not really sure how that will really affect the risk for severe thunderstorms, because that will lead to overall a higher pressure region across that area. So I'm not too sure how that convergence is gonna help the risk for severe thunderstorms. I think it may even may limit the risk for severe thunderstorms a little bit. However, across the Texas region, we definitely have a really strong upper level jet streak, upwards of 128 knots, which should definitely provide us with a lot of speed shear, not directional shear, a lot of speed shear, especially with the lack of that low level jet across this region, where it is getting up to like 20 miles per hour. That's going to provide a lot of directional shear and a pretty big risk for hail across this region if we have the instability to support it. Taking a look at our bulk shear at our 0 to 6 kilometers, so we can get an idea of how that's going to affect our hail risk, as well as how much shear is going to be the environment overall to support our hail risk. So let's start off with a 5% hail risk for southern Texas, where I think there's going to be overall a better risk for hail across this region. We do still have a 5%, but we definitely do have quite a lot of speed shear across this region. Upwards of 50 to potentially 80 to maybe even 90 knots of bulk shear. So that means a 90 knot increase, 50 to 90 knot increase from our surface level to our 200 millibars. So that is definitely from our surface level to our 6 kilometers in the atmosphere, not necessarily our 200 millibars. So we definitely have quite a lot of a increase and quite a lot of speed shear across this region. However, as our contours are indicating, we may have overall some fairly limited instability, so that may be leading to that lower end hail risk as I was talking about. It does depend on our instability. And then for our 5% hail risk further up north, we do have much less speed shear up here. However, we are definitely expected to see quite a lot of speed shear nonetheless, upwards of 50 to 40 miles per hour or knots of bulk shear. So we should definitely see some fairly decent speed shear to support the risk of our hail. However, our surface-based instability contours are also indicating that we may have some fairly limited instability across this region, which is going to lead to a fairly limited hail risk. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer directional shear to kind of give us an idea of what our shear is going to look like for our tornado risk. Mainly focusing on that 2% tornado risk for northwestern Oklahoma there. We are expected to see some fairly decent speed shear across this region, with the speed shear values at 0 to 3 kilometers that may be able to get upwards of 200, 300 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity, potentially getting upwards of 500 meters squared a second squared of storm relative felicity, which is definitely really going to be supportive of the potential of at least a low-end hail risk. But then, as our surface-based instability contours were indicating, we are going to see some fairly limited instability, which is going to lead to a limited tornado risk, but we could still see some spin up. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity, so we can go over the when and where we should be able to see our severe thunderstorms, which is our timing. Let's start off with a marginal threat for western Oklahoma into the Texas Panhandle. Our storms are currently ongoing, indicated by a special weather statement for the region. However, our storms are expected to continue until probably around 1 a.m. To 2 a.m. and then we should get another round of storms that are going to develop further down to the south, which are probably going to develop around 3 a.m. and continue into the very early morning of tomorrow, and may lead to some fairly heavy rainfall at times for the Oklahoma City region, which may impact your morning commute. So definitely be aware of that. As far as our marginal threat for the south, we are probably going to see our storms develop potentially sometime around 6 a.m. Or the very early morning of tomorrow, and those are going to continue into the very early morning of tomorrow, and potentially lead into the afternoon, and may impact Houston, and may potentially lead to some heavy rainfall, maybe some severe hail, and some damaging wind gusts across Houston. So definitely make sure you are watching for that, because that may impact your morning commute as well. Taking a look at our dew points and how this is going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms. From here on out, we're going to be taking a look at our environment that our storms are expected to be in, and then we'll culminate our upper level stuff in our shear and our environment in our composites after this. So taking a look at our dew points, we are expected to see some fairly limited dew points across western Oklahoma, where we may see dew points are probably going to be around the low to mid 40s, which is fairly bad for the risk for severe thunderstorms, honestly. So it really goes to show how limited our risk for severe thunderstorms across western Oklahoma is. So we should definitely see some fairly limited instability across this region, which we already got a hint at from our surface-based instability contours on our bulk shear models. And then across Texas for the southern marginal threat, we are expected to see much better instability because it is the Texas region. It is along the coast, so we are definitely expected to see a lot of Gulf moisture across this region, with dew points that are potentially going to be getting upwards of the upper 50s to potentially the low and maybe the mid 60s. However, across the Houston area, where storms may potentially become concerning for the morning commute of tomorrow, we are expected to see dew points that may be able to get upwards of the low to mid 60s, which should definitely continue to fuel storms into the early morning of tomorrow. And then we can also take a look at that southern round of storms that was expected to happen across the southern end of that northern marginal threat, where they develop around 3 a.m. We are expected to see a little bit better moisture, but it's still going to be fairly limited. With dew points are going to be getting into potentially the mid to low 50s, and that is still going to lead to some fairly limited instability. Taking a look at our temperatures and combining them with our dew points to take a look at how that's going to affect our instability and how much instability we are expected to have, as well as how our temperatures are expected to drop when it becomes nighttime. Across the Oklahoma region, we are expected to see storms develop in an environment that's probably going to be crisp around the mid 70s, which is going to be fairly warm. This is going to lead to some fairly decent instability if we had greater dew points, but because of our dew points being so low, we are not really expected to see all that much instability whatsoever. And then as storms develop, the sun is expected to set and the temperatures are going to drop rapidly, with temperatures potentially getting as low as the 50s, the low 50s, may even approach the upper to mid 40s in the very early morning of tomorrow, which is going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms, especially with that second round, because there's going to be less heat and overall less instability to work with. So overall, again, with our dew points and how quickly our heat's expected to go away as the sun sets, that is significantly going to limit the risk for severe thunderstorms. And then across the Texas region, storms are expected to probably begin with a crisp environment of the upper 60s, which honestly isn't too crisp and will overall limit how much instability we have. And as storms are continuing into very early morning of tomorrow, we are expected to continue to see temperatures that are going to be around the low 60s, but may be able to approach the mid 60s closer to the coast, but still is going to lead to very limited instability as a result. Taking a look at our lapse rates, starting off with the lapse rates for the northern marginal threat area, we are expected to see some fairly decent lapse rates across this region that may be able to get upwards of the mid 7s to potentially the low 8s, and maybe even to the upper 7s as well, further into the Texas Panhandle, which is going to be definitely fairly decent, and it's going to help our risk for severe thunderstorms with a various amount of things, with storm organization, potentially storm intensity, as well as our risk for hail. Because what this does is it means that it gets colder faster the higher up you go in the atmosphere, and if that means that we have colder temperatures the higher up you go, that is going to expand the optimal layer for hail development, so it's much easier to reach with an updraft. But with how little instability we are expected to have, our lapse rates are definitely very needed for the potential of any sort of hail across this region. And then the same goes for the Texas region. We are expected to continue to see some potentially less lapse rates, less intense lapse rates, but should definitely help with the same things that Oklahoma is going to need help with. Taking a look at our 700 millibars temperature, as well as our convective inhibition and how that's going to affect the risk for severe thunderstorms. Let's start off with a northern marginal threat. We are expected to see some overall non-existent warm air advection at our 700 millibars, which is going to lead to overall limited to potentially non-existent convective inhibition as storms are currently developing and ongoing. However, as I mentioned previously, temperatures are expected to rapidly decrease after storms develop as the sun sets, which is going to lead to an increase of convective inhibition, which is indicated by our contours, mainly our pink and red contours. Where you see this hole here, that is an ongoing storm on our models. So around the surrounding environment, we have an insane amount of convective inhibition, which is going to severely limit our storms after they develop and the sun sets. And then across the Texas region, we may see some of the same thing as those storms that were going to remain into the very early morning, around 10 a.m. across the Texas region. We are expected to see convective inhibition introduced with those, which is going to lead to an overall decrease in the risk for severe thunderstorms and probably weakening storms by the time the sun rises. And again, the same thing for Oklahoma goes for Texas. As the sun sets, we are expected to see an increase in convective inhibition, which is going to severely limit our storm development and the risk for storms and storm intensity after they develop in the sun sets. Finally, culminating everything that we've looked at for our instability in our storm environment, we're going to be starting off with our most unstable cape, then we're going to move to surface instability, and then 0 to 3 kilometer instability, and how that's going to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Let's start off with the northern marginal threat, where we are expected to see extremely limited instability. After storms develop and are currently ongoing, we are expected to see a rapid decrease in most unstable cape, as a lot of that instability, which is fairly weak to begin with, is used up and convective inhibition is introduced. We are expected to see potentially cape values are probably going to be around the mid to low triple digits, which is going to be very limiting and as far as fueling the risk for severe thunderstorms, as there is hardly any instability to really work with, and will lead to very marginal severe thunderstorms, if any thunderstorms at all. And the same goes for the second round of storms that may develop further down south. We are expected to see maybe potentially greater instability. They are still going to be in the mid triple digits, but maybe slightly higher than what we're seeing across Oklahoma right now. And it's still going to fuel a very marginal risk for severe thunderstorms. Across Texas, we are expected to see a little bit better instability. However, keep in mind, after the sun sets, we are expected to see a rapid increase in convective inhibition, which is going to severely limit our risk of severe thunderstorms. However, regardless, we are expected to see quite a lot of instability that looks like it is going to continue to build for the next couple of hours into tomorrow, with CAPE values that may be able to begin approaching the upper 1000s. It may get close to the 2000s on the 21st, which is going to set the stage for the risk of severe thunderstorms for tomorrow. However, after storms originally develop, we are expected to see some fairly limited instability, and then a lot of convective inhibition is going to be introduced. So overall, this should still fuel overall a very marginal risk for severe thunderstorms, but still be able to fuel our various hazards. Taking a look at our surface-based instability and how that's going to affect the potential for surface-based storms, we are expected to see instability or surface-based instability that's probably going to translate down from our most unstable, and this does help our tornado risk, and actually does allow for a tornado risk in general, because surface-based instability allows for storms to be rooted in the surface layer, which means that rotation can reach the surface layer and develop a tornado. Because if you have an elevated storm with inflow that is elevated from the surface, that means you cannot have rotation that's going to be at the surface, and that is not going to allow for the potential of tornadoes. So the fact that we have surface instability translating from our most unstable, that is indicative of the potential of at least a low-end tornado risk with the parameters we've already looked at so far. Very low-end tornado risk for surface-based instability will definitely allow for the potential of surface-based spin-up and the potential for tornadoes. And then across Texas, we are expected to see potentially more limited surface-based instability, with surface-based instability that's going to be mostly limited into the far Gulf and the coast regions. However, further inland, any storms that develop further inland are probably going to be elevated, but still capable of producing our various hazards, such as the potential for some marginally severe hail, and the potential for some damaging wind gusts. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to aid in the risk for severe thunderstorms, we are expected to see a very weak 0 to 3 kilometer instability pool for the first couple of hours after storm development that are probably going to lead to 0 to 3 kilometer instability values that are probably going to get upwards of 30 joules per kilogram to 40 joules per kilogram, which is basically nothing in terms of 0 to 3 kilometer instability. However, it may help with our tornado risk a very tiny amount. It shouldn't really lead to all that much of help for our tornado risk, but our 0 to 3 kilometer instability is there to help nonetheless, but it shouldn't really do all that much because it is far too weak. And then for our marginal threat further down south, we are expected to see basically no surface-based instability by the storms, 0 to 3 kilometer instability by the time storms are expected to develop. We are expected to see some 0 to 3 kilometer instability that may be mostly limited off to the coast. However, further inland, we are not expected to see 0 to 3 kilometer instability, which is not really going to aid with anything. Taking a look at our 2% tornado risk and our energy helicity index values, what this does is it combines our instability and our wind shear to give us where it overlaps and how intense it overlaps. So if we have more instability and more shear, that's going to give us greater energy helicity index values. So it is really good to look at for our tornado risk. However, for our 2% tornado risk, we basically have no indicator of a tornado risk whatsoever with our 0 to 3 kilometer energy helicity index values. However, this is likely going to be a result of the fact that we have hardly any sort of instability that's really going to support that much of a tornado risk. Again, our risk for severe thunderstorms is very limited across this region. However, we do have a low-level jet that is extending down to 850 millibars, indicated by our contours here that aren't shaded. So we do have our wind shear in place. However, we are kind of lacking the instability, but instability is going to be in place and may support a very low-end risk for tornadoes. This 2% tornado risk is probably going to be on the lower end of 2% tornado risk, probably as low as a 2% tornado risk really goes. So again, some spin-up is still possible in the atmosphere, but it is likely going to be very limited and very weak. Taking a look at our wind gust models and how that's going to lead to our risk for damaging wind gusts across this region, keep in mind that our damaging wind gust risk is definitely fairly limited, especially with the parameters that we have seen across this environment. We are expected to see the potential of some scatter damaging wind gusts, especially with the storm that is currently ongoing. So there may be a little bit of bias there because there is actually a severe thunderstorm currently ongoing. But we are seeing models indicate the potential of damaging wind gusts that may be able to get upwards of 40 to 30 miles per hour, which is definitely going to be fairly concerning as a risk for some isolated damaging wind gusts. And then for our second round of severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see probably a much lower risk for severe thunderstorms and a much lower risk for severe damaging wind gusts. And we should potentially see damaging wind gusts that may be around 10 miles per hour to 30 to 20 miles per hour. Very limited there. However, for the 5% damaging wind gust risk further down south for Texas, it's going to be limited again with damaging wind gusts that are probably going to be around 20 miles per hour as indicated by our models. So again, our damaging wind gust risk is also limited. Taking a look at our large hail parameters on our mesoanalysis site from the SPC, to kind of give us an idea of what the hail risk may look like after we've combined everything. Something that's interesting is that there's basically nowhere in the severe risk area that is indicative of the potential of large hail. This is likely as a result of the fact that our parameters are so weak and our risk for severe thunderstorms is so low that they are way too low to be picked up by our large hail parameter composite models. So overall, it really just goes to show how overall low end the risk for severe thunderstorms is. But what we have looked at so far, from a meteorological standpoint, our parameters should be supportive of at least a small risk for some severe hail. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator. And join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay with it for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong in this forecast, or would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX. Weather Watcher does do forecasts for Europe if you are interested in those. One Nation Weather does forecasts for the United States, but they are fairly long range, but he does an amazing job at them. If you are interested in more of the long range, more digestible content. And then JaxonWX does do storm chasing content, which I will probably start doing here soon. And then hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.